The Emerald Knight, Chapter 15. Clint hated dignitaries, and that was perfectly fine, because they seemed to hate him right back. They had made only the most cursory introductions in his direction, and turned their attention straight to Orinda, which would normally be exactly what he wanted, but today it got on his nerves. Everyone's attention should really be on Bruana, because it was her birthday. So he stood by the buffet laid out in the garden and scowled in the general direction of his party guests. He started when Morgan plucked the wineglass from his hand and began to drink, then changed the direction of his ire. He didn't particularly feel like fighting, he very rarely did, so he picked up a new glass and started over. Morgan took that one too, so he silently reached for the buffet and took a third, all while maintaining eye contact with his friend. Morgan looked at his full hands and huffed. "Damn it, you've outsmarted me again!" He chuckled, and took another drink from the first one he had stolen. "Why are you pissy?" "Because royal culture sickens me," Clint scowled. "This does seem overly fancy for a baby's party," Morgan agreed. "No one likes it. Orinda doesn't even like it. Oh, I guess Bruana's having fun." Clint followed his eyeline to see his daughter toddling up to them in her party dress, with her arms outstretched, grinning from ear to ear. He bent down and let her run full force into him, and stood, holding her expertly under his arm, while she clung to his shirt. She tried to climb over his chest to his other hand, but he held the glass out of her reach. His eyes widened as she smacked his chest, but the stone remained dormant. "No, princess," he nuzzled her with his forehead. "This is Daddy's drink. Let's get you some juice." "Daddy!" she cried in outrage and smacked him again. "Hey!" Morgan glared at her. "We don't hit people. Be nice to your father." Bruana was growing tired of Morgan's stern outlook and tried to tell him so, but she didn't quite have the vocabulary, and her inability to articulate her thoughts frustrated her to no end. It wasn't the first time she had had such an issue. In fact, she would sit and try so hard to communicate and grow so frustrated with her limitations that tears would begin to well down her face. Clint understood how she felt better than most people, and when she began to wail again, he sat down his drink and pressed her little face into his shoulder. "Can you not be a dick to my kid?" he hissed, and Morgan rolled his eyes. "Clint, you can't just let her hit people." Morgan sighed. "It's cute now, but it won't be as cute when she's a teenager who thinks it'll be fun to break somebody's nose. If she has your strength and you don't curve it, she's gonna be a terror." "Maybe if you didn't run your mouth, you wouldn't get hit in it," Clint replied stiffly, bouncing up and down. He began to hum in as soothing a voice as he could manage, with his nerves as shot as they were. "She didn't hit me." Morgan took another sip of the wine he had taken from Clint. "She hit you." "Then it doesn't matter, does it?" Clint shot him a dirty look and rubbed his daughter's back. "Come on, princess, it's your party. Smile for Daddy. I got you a present that I think you're gonna like." Eventually her sobs quieted, while Morgan looked on in disapproval. Clint jerked his head up to catch his judgmental stare, and spoke again. "Would it make you feel better to hit Uncle Morgan in the face?" he asked, as if such an action would be the funniest thing he had ever seen. He held her outstretched so that she was level with Morgan's eyeline, and continued, "Go on, beat him up. He was mean to me." Bruana's eyes widened in disbelief. Morgan had been nothing but kind to her. He was one of her oldest and dearest friends. She had known him her entire life. But she had no reason to believe that her father would ever lie to her, and she cared for him above everything and everyone else in the world. He was the kindest, most gentle soul she had ever met, and the idea of anyone causing him harm or pain, even emotionally, angered her beyond her ability to contain. She drew back with all her might and smacked Morgan square in the face. Morgan flew back against the buffet, rattling it, and clutched the place she had struck. He stayed there as in disbelief for a few seconds and tumbled to the floor. He sprawled on the grass, clutching his face and convulsing, as her father brought her back and snuggled her to his chest. She felt the vibration of his laughter, which he seemed to be trying to contain, before he knelt and sat her on the ground. "Go get him, princess," Clint smirked, and Bruana ran to Morgan with such dexterity that she only fell once, and picked herself up with no help from anyone. She reached him and began an all-out assault while he shrieked in pain, as she pounded everywhere she could reach. He squirmed and rolled in an attempt to escape, but she pursued him and managed to climb onto his back. After a few minutes, he went limp. Clint kicked him for good measure, and he wailed. "Leave me!" he screamed, as if he were in an amphitheater. "I'm dead! I have been slain!" Bruana cackled and smacked him again. "Morgan, what the hell are you doing?" Arinda hissed through clenched teeth and pulled her daughter off his back. "Dying!" he replied in the same dramatic fashion, rolling onto his back and clutching his chest. "Can't you see that I've been beaten to death? Are you blind?" "I might be deaf. Get off the grass. There are dignitaries from all over the planet." She glared down at him. Clem blushed and put a hand on her shoulder. "It's my fault I started it. He was just playing with the baby." "It's not the time to play with the baby!" Arinda shot her husband a look filled with ire. "The pavilion is filled with royalty." "It's her birthday party." Clint gently extracted his daughter from her arms. "Let her play." "It's a social event, Clint," Arinda explained patiently. "We're making connections here. I'm trying to run an empire." Clint sighed and quietly admitted, "You're right. I'm sorry. Morgan, come on, get up." "People expect a lot from a dead man." Morgan hadn't moved. "Mama," Bruana explained patiently, "he's dead." Arinda's entire body vibrated with rage. "That's one of the first phrases she's ever said. I hope you two are happy." "I am!" Clint said, grinning from ear to ear as if he didn't recognize her sarcasm. "That's a whole sentence, and it made perfect sense. She's a genius." "Oh my god, I'm so old," Morgan complained. I might actually not be able to get up. I think I threw my back out when I did that pratfall." "Good!" Arinda hissed. "Pratfall?" Bruana asked, and Clint snuggled her into his chest. "She's a genius," he repeated, and Arinda rubbed her temples with both hands. She left Clint crooning over the baby and Morgan lying on the ground to tend to her guest, and possibly to retrieve Anilla to deal with the two of them, as she was beginning to fear that she would set them aflame before she caught herself. "It is with a light heart that I welcome my distinguished guest once again." Arinda spoke from her place at the head of the table, standing over the feast that had been laid out. Clint sat beside her and tried not to fiddle with his glass. He succeeded better than Bruana, who had been placed to his right in a chair with a little tray, a position she seemed to dislike as she beat upon the tray as if it were a drum. She seemed to have no natural rhythm, so he put a hand on the tray to steady it and muffle the sound, out of respect for the speech Arinda had prepared, and Bruana, undeterred, continued to beat. But now she smacked against his glove, which produced significantly less noise, so he considered it a victory. "We are honored," Arinda continued as Clint mouthed, "Quiet, princess," to his daughter, and she ignored him. "With the attention and well wishes that you have shown my firstborn, Princess Bruana Morgana Noctifish Firefist, heir of the Aurelian Empire, princess of all elvenkind. We believe that with the blessings she has received today, she will be better able to grow into—" Clint shot up from his seat and reached out as if he were going to smack his wife full in the face, and the crowd at the table gasped in shock. In his outstretched hand, he held an arrow. "What the hell?" Arinda asked, staring at it in shock. Clint moved his body again in a snap and snatched another arrow from the air with his other hand. The second one set something off inside him, because he had grabbed it seconds before it hit his infant daughter. His body began to shake, and he screamed, "Do you think I don't see you, motherfuckers?" he asked, and a green light seemed to engulf him. He snapped both arrows, apparently by accident, and Morgan and Anilla stood from their positions on the other side of the table, Morgan with his hands outstretched and Anilla with hers folded over her heart. Clint closed his eyes, which had begun to glow, and Bruana clapped for him because she was under the impression that he was putting on a show for her benefit. She was not wrong, per se, but she was not exactly right. Strong vines shot from the ground at Clint's feet and spread, faster than any magical plant grown by any mage, faster than the laws of nature ought to allow. One grew up the side of the castle, and the other shot into the garden itself and plunged through hedges. Arinda kept repeating his name while Bruana clapped, but he ignored them both. The vines retreated into the ground with the same unbelievable speed, but now 2 men lay encased in their grip, caught on the thorns and plant matter so thick that they could not hack through it fast enough to escape. Clint turned slowly to see the struggling men on the ground. He reeled back to the table, picked up the dessert spoon from his place setting, and knelt, oblivious to the silence of his guest, to the shock that he had created. The vines tightened around them, and the barely audible sound of their pain was a testament to their training. Whoever they were, they knew what they were doing. He moved to the one closest to him, at the foot of Bruana's chair, and reached out a hand. They were both earth elves, fairly old, trained assassins, he judged, and he was beyond insulted. The light from his eyes fell upon the struggling man as he jerked his head back by the hair. When Klin spoke, his voice was so low that the man could barely hear him, and very unlike his normal speaking voice. He was quiet by nature, but his vocal cords rumbled, and the assassin heard him deep within his very soul. "What mortal," Klin asked, the light in his eyes locking the man he held, "would dare to clash against the Emerald Knight?" "Emerald Knight?" The man whimpered, and wriggled against his bonds. They tightened, and blood began to seep through his clothes, so he tried diplomacy. "Please, your majesty, I'll tell you who hired me. I'll tell you everything I know." Klin jerked the man's head back further, and tapped the spoon against his thumb, before spinning it, holding it as if he were planning to eat. "How many men," he asked the assassin, "does it take to tell a story?" The man's eyes jerked to his compatriot, who had gone silent, and they stared at each other in contemplation, until Klin became aware that no one was going to answer him. "I asked you a question," he reminded the man, who stared up at him with wide eyes. "I'm not prepared to die for this," the man replied. "I just needed the money." "Give me an answer," Klin demanded. "One!" the man shouted as Klin pulled his hair. "But it should be me. I know more. I know everything." "You would turn on your companion so quickly," Klin snarled, and something about that seemed to set off a fire within him. In one smooth motion, he plunged the spoon into the man's right eye. "Klin, stop!" Arinda's hand was on his shoulder, and he jerked and lashed out at her. His elbow collided with her abdomen and sent her tumbling backwards, and with that obstacle gone, he went back to carving out the man's eye. "Give me back my husband, you wretch!" Arinda picked herself up, undeterred. "Or I will set that pretty little body you like so much ablaze!" "Don't threaten me, mortal," Klin hissed at her, and pulled the eye free with a loud pop. The man's screams filled the air, and it took Klin a second to hear the sound of a child's laughter. He jerked his head up to see Bruana laughing and clapping her hands, and his mouth fell open. "Funny, Daddy!" she said, and he realized that blood had splattered on her perfect party dress. She mimicked the man's screams, and he realized that in her youth and innocence, she did not identify the event for what it was. She thought it was a show. She probably thought the blood was fake. She probably thought the men were actors. She couldn't find out. She couldn't find out. He stumbled to his feet and into the table in a blind panic as the vines fell away and became harmless plants. The man he had not attacked scrambled to his feet and ran, but one of the guards who lined the garden put an arrow through his brain, and Bruana cackled. "Pratfall!" she shrieked in delight, and Clem put a hand to his forehead as he hyperventilated. "That's right," he whispered to her. "Pratfall, just like Uncle Morgan. It's a game, princess. It's all a game, daddies." Arinda had stood and was directing the guards to the man on the ground, who was clutching his face as blood pooled from the empty socket that once held his eye. "I want a healer brought to the dungeon," she told them. "I don't want this one to die before we were able to find out who ordered the assassination." They dragged the man away while he shrieked at Klin. "You monster!" He clutched at his face. "That man is the Emerald Knight! He's going to kill you!" Klin realized that the hand he had used to push back his hair was covered in blood. His face was covered as well, and he had ruined Bruana's party. "Will you shut him up?" Arinda hissed at the guards, and one of them shoved a piece of cloth into the man's mouth as they dragged him inside. Yet still he tried, muffled and incoherent, to scream his warnings. She turned to Klin and took his face gently in her hands. His eyes were blue and wide with fright. "Oh, love," she said. "You've saved our lives. My darling, my hero, my love." She pulled him into a kiss, and he pushed her away. "No, you can't," he said in a low voice. "You can't make this right. You can't. He took his breath in deep gusts, and it was too much air. He was drowning in it. He was going to pass out. His eyes darted to Bruana, who had gone from giggling to staring at him with concern. "I have to," he explained, his eyes darting back to Arinda. I have to go see my attendants, and I got stupid blood on my face, my hair, clothes. I gotta go." He shoved her away and ran for the castle. Morgan got up and darted after him, while Arinda turned back to her guest to start the damage control. "I believe," she began, her voice measured and calm, "that someone in the nobility, perhaps someone at this very table, is unhappy with the way I've been running things since Sandra's death." She put both hands on the table and leaned forward.
I would like to address that person. I have not been deaf to the rumors that have been spread about my dear husband. I have heard, in the short time I have been associated with the upper crust, people say terrible things of their own king. That he is weak, that he is spineless, that he is a drunkard. He has borne all these insults in silence because he is a better person than I am. But I hope that today has served as a lesson to all of you. And my advice to the person who dared attempt to harm our child is this.
She spread her arms and leaned in like a predatory animal.
Run.